Hi, folks. I'm Dustin Siggins with Proven Media Solutions. I'll bet you're glad your clients aren't Tim Walls today. Unfortunately, they still could be. Today on Cracking the Comms Code, we're tackling the importance of coalitions to create success both in the legislative season, which is next week in some states, and when the midterms come in 10 months. With me today is the Proven Media team, actually. This is one of the first times we've actually had the rest of the team on. It's going to be a lot of fun. Carrie Taloxco is our Director of Public Affairs. She previously worked at the White House, State Policy Network, and half a dozen other places. She has extensive experience leading DC and state level coalitions. Robert Kuykendall is our Director of Accounts. He has worked for the Mike Huckabee presidential campaign in 2008, has run a number of local and state campaigns in Tennessee, and has worked in the nonprofit and business worlds. And Jordan Benegas is our Director of Special Projects, brings a decade of experience running state level policy campaigns, and also was a regional director for Susana Martinez in both of her runs for governor of, or successful runs, I should say, all thanks to Jordan, of course, for governor of New Mexico. But before we dive in, please don't forget to bring your questions, insights, and experiences into the comments. We want this to be a lively conversation about the importance of coalitions during legislative season, as well as with the midterms. Robert, Carrie, and Jordan, please introduce yourselves.
Okay, I guess I'll start. So yes, Carrie Taloxco, very happy to be Director of Public Affairs for Proven Media Solutions. Been around DC and state public policy for about 30 years, specializing in policy itself, as well as coalition building, which I just really love because I think coalitions are the basis of everything, and people also often forget about them. So happy to bring that expertise and experiences to this call today.
I'm Robert Kuykendall. I've been with Proven Media Solutions for several years now. It seems like yesterday we started, but yeah, these opportunities to join the rest of the team in a fun conversation, but also share our insights and in a collaborative manner are really exciting. You know, my background is in the political world, and then I consider myself the accidental communications professional, and I love seeing how things that are really important in the political world, especially when it comes to communications, really apply to business and across industries. There are several principles that are universal, and I really enjoy these chances to kind of pare down to get to those truths and say, hey, this is where it applies to us in the political world, us in the communications world, and really everyone else that's in some sort of enterprise.
Good afternoon, y'all. Jordan Benegas here. The most recent addition to the Proven Media Solutions team, and glad to be a part of it. As Dustin mentioned, I've worked on coalitions for the last decade and a half. My dad actually was a coalition builder in the public health space, so I like to say that I continued the family business. But since moving here from New Mexico, I've been working for political nonprofits and campaigns, mostly on the center right, organizing people to affect change in their communities. Glad to be here to chat with y'all.
You know, and one of the things we're going to talk today about is the difference between public policy coalition work and political coalition work, but also how that differs at the White House, state, and local. So let's jump right in here. Carrie, I'd love each of you to explain a little bit of how coalitions work in your backgrounds. You know, for me as a PR person, I love coalitions because they mean that there is just one voice. There are many voices, especially when, for many of our clients, they might have a big, the CEO or a big political player, but when we're able to offer them everyday people who have those human interest stories and have that local relevance or industry relevance, can actually play a lot more powerfully. And that's just a small example of a coalition that can be built through, media. Never mind going out to town halls. Never mind social media, bringing influencers in, and all the things that you've all done in your background. So, Carrie, if you can explain a little bit about how you've worked with the White House, but also at state level and kind of those differences. Jordan, I'd love you to differentiate between political and public affairs. So, political and policy making. And then Robert, I'd love for you to tie that into the business side because so many coalitions are driven by business interests.
Right. I would love to start with a very short anecdote. About 25 years ago, maybe when we were still using fax machines, I was working with a client in Arizona on a particular issue, and it was a trade association, and we were lobbying a particular member of Congress. We sent 12 letters in support of a particular piece of legislation into the congressman's local office, always do the local office. I know there were 12 because I sat there and I fed them through the fax machine. When we met with the legislator, he leaned over to myself and my colleague and said, "Oh my gosh, I got like 80 letters." So that is the beauty of a coalition, is that
Mhm.
you're expanding that voice, you're growing that voice, you're giving it sort of more than all the individuals together. And the thing about coalitions, just sort of run through the basics a little bit, they're really human nature. If you have teenagers, or if you've ever been a teenager, you have probably created a coalition against your parents. It works that simply. People want to gather. They want to gather about things they care about. Coalitions come from many forms, small to large. Working with Office of Public Liaison in the White House, we had huge national coalitions, and we also got calls about little tiny local ones. All those knit together, if they are knitted, if you have the knitting needles, if you recognize the small and the large all kind of work together. Congress meets in DC, but what they get nervous about is what they see in their local offices, just like the fax story. Some coalitions are formal. They have an IRS designation. They have their own website. Some are not. Both are very adequate and both are very necessary. And again, the key element about any coalition is that people are brought together to gather about that one thing, whatever that one thing is. It's kind of like Ronald Reagan's 80% rule. If the person's with you, 80% is your friend on this issue. It doesn't matter if you're disagreeing about 5 other things, 5 other business issues, or 5 other policy issues, or 5 other campaign issues that you're running on. If you can get together on that one thing, you can really accelerate that. It really makes a huge difference. And again, a coalition doesn't really run on a horizontal plane. It's more like a hamster wheel. You talk to the legislator, you talk to the staff, you run op-eds, you have a messaging campaign. It all circulates around your issue and makes really a big difference. If you have an issue you want to promote, legislation you want passed or defeated, or a business issue that you're concerned about, your lobbyist is not your coalition person. Your lobbyist is possibly very helpful to you, but not the coalition aspect of that. That's where public affairs comes in. That's where you create a coalition. The basics, you give it a name. It gives it validity when you give it a name. You find it a leader. Any coalition I've seen, either political or policy, in the last 30 years that's fallen apart, it's because no one was willing to step forward and be a leader. Organize with regularity, whether you're meeting by Zoom, in person, email, it doesn't matter. That leader has to assign tasks. It needs to vet members. You don't have to do, a big FBI dossier on your membership, but do a quick Google search and make sure that you don't have someone in your coalition that's going to go way off the, reservation and say all kinds of crazy stuff that can bounce back and hurt you. Because we were talking about this earlier, and Robert made the point, which is a very important point, that you also, as you're telling and advising and instructing your coalition on what to say, you also have to make sure you tell them and advise them and help them understand what it is important for them not to say. So you communicate all in a big circle. Again, whether you're doing it local, if you're local, you're going to events and talking there. If you're national, you're on talk radio, you're doing op-eds, all that kind of stuff really matters. This seems really simple, and you're probably all thinking, oh, that's just really basic. Well, yeah, it is. But the thing is even if it's like falling off a log, A lot of times organizations and businesses overlook a key aspect of messaging and success that lives in the coalitions, which is why people like us in the public affairs space who have experience with this can jump in and help folks with it. Small, large, medium, a policy coalition circulating around one policy issue, a campaign, a business issue that you concerned about. Oh gosh, if they pass that regulation, my company is in trouble. You need a coalition. You need to find the people who agree with you on that. Here we are at America 250. I hope you all saw the lovely presentation on the monument last week for New Year's Eve. We were founded on a coalition. We were founded on a messy coalition of people who disagreed about a whole bunch of things. We had military guys, we had farmers, we had intellectuals. They came from all different, weren't even states at that point. They left the room, they came back in the room, but they made our country. And, you look through our history, abolitionists, right? Look what they did for our country, for civil rights. Women's suffrage. Woodrow Wilson was very much opposed to giving women the right to vote until a coalition of women marched in front of the White House, all went to jail and wrote letters about how horrible it was in jail. And somehow President Wilson then changed his mind because this coalition came together. So it's a strategic investment in communications and public affairs, created by you, or orchestrated by you, led by you, grown and mentored by you. You have to generate all this messaging content for real success. It really does make a huge difference. And again, there's no coalition wand. It's work. It can actually be a lot of fun if you want it to be. And that's sort of the basics, I think, of the whole thing is that the only way to have a successful coalition is to start one and to recognize that your issue is important enough to you, no matter where you stand on the political spectrum, on the policy spectrum. That's where you're going to get a lot more voice, because you yelling on a street corner is one thing. You've got 15 people behind you singing while you're yelling on a street corner. That's going to be a lot more effective for you.
I guess the show's over. I mean, Carrie just kind of took the show. And
Sorry.
I know there wasn't a single or in a whole 6 minutes. That's pretty impressive. Jordan?
No, I hope that our viewers appreciate that, because you're essentially getting an MPA with the knowledge that Carrie Tlaska is dropping on this live. So yeah, appreciate you. And we're fortunate enough to get that every day of the week here on our team. But really good stuff, Carrie. And it's really interesting. You and I are from different corners of the country, you, the Northeast, and myself, the Southwest. And so much of what you just outlined resonates with what I've learned building and growing coalitions throughout my career. And one of the things that I liked that you outlined, well, two things, and that is that coalitions are as old as time, as old as people, right? It's how we make decisions, it's how we lead ourselves. And that means that, some coalitions exist without the intentionality behind them. It's just those that agree come together. And really, there's a lot of value in discovering how those the majority, or at least a powerful group of people agree. And the other thing that I'll mention, just to get to Dustin's point, to differentiate between a political and the more public affairs coalition, is I loved how you said, Carrie, a coalition is a group of people coming together around one thing. And the way I see it is the political coalition is behind that one thing is a person, is the candidate. At least that's how we operated from on the Martinez campaign. Is as we built this coalition, we had precinct captains that we identified that were with us, and we needed them in strategic precincts that we identified where we needed the vote to turn out. And so we identified these people that believed in our candidate and that had the social and political capital to be leaders in those important areas. And then on the other side of things, as I worked for nonprofits, you had coalitions that were built around ideas and practitioners who were facing unnecessary regulations whether that was home-based businesses that were cooks or barbers and cosmetologists. And those folks organized around this idea that they should be able to earn an honest living and that bureaucrats in their state government shouldn't be able to tell them otherwise. And both of those types of coalitions, I enjoyed leading and organizing. It's incredibly empowering to see folks realize there's kind of a light that turns on when they realize that they can change things in their community. They can change things in their government, and then as a result of that, change their own lives and those around them. When they realize that these elected officials are actually humans like them and are listening, and they being the coalition members have this route to this doorway to affecting change, and that was incredibly rewarding work for sure.
Just to go on for 1 second to something Jordan said that I think really matters. A coalition is also, because I think this is a really important point, so I want to punctuate it for you, Jordan. A coalition, it's a shift in a way, if handled properly. It takes the focus away from someone or something that appears or is perceived to have a self-interest and broadens it out. And that, I think, is something that you just hit on, which is the magic of the coalition. Well, that one guy doesn't want that regulation on real estate because he has that big house. Well, all 40 people in the neighborhood don't want it. That's a whole different ballgame. And you extrapolate that out, right? So I think that's a really important point to note.
Carrie, based on your comment right there, would you agree that sometimes we fall into the trap maybe of looking at everything and there's this, I don't know, it's like this dichotomy of we look at everything in these binary choices, right? The reality is that we kind of have to, because there's either we're successful or we're not successful. It's either A or B, yes or no. But we fall into that trap of saying there's side one, side two. But the reality is things are pretty pluralistic, especially if we take a step back and talk about like parliamentary systems, where it's not this bicameral type of situation. I mean, that's kind of the trap we always fall into, especially when we look at other cultures, other countries, and we're like, China's doing this. Well, China has their own kind of political situation. We look at our political opponents and say, oh, well, that's like this monolith, but they're really not. They've got their own.
That's a good point.
Their own system, their own coalitions that they're trying to build to get to that point that makes them successful.
Well, and Robert, you have a lot of background with the business world. How did you see coalitions working within the business realm, and especially related to driving public affairs outcomes, public policy outcomes?
All right. Well, a few weeks ago, I had a conversation with a state legislator friend of mine, and we were talking about health policy. I was just trying to get some background to see where he was or what he was thinking about the upcoming term, which starts next Tuesday, every second Tuesday in Tennessee. And he didn't really have any strong positions. He said, "Oh yeah, we're going to be talking about healthcare like we always are in the General Assembly." But he said, "Robert, what I am concerned about is anything that affects the providers in the small independent providers in my district. That's what I care about, and that's who I want to advocate on their behalf, but also that's who I want to communicate towards." And we fleshed that out a little bit to talk about, why is this important? Why does the mom and pop durable medical equipment business in a small rural district in a small county matter? Well, for one, that's probably the only provider for that. The rest of the constituents rely on that provider being there, but it's also the type of community where everyone knows who that provider is. And it matters to this state legislator that he has this relationship with that provider, and he's got 6 or 7 other counties, and there's a whole bunch of other providers there. And so there's this coalition of sorts, loose confederation maybe even, that exists. It's these small town healthcare providers. Well, this legislator also has a very successful record of not even getting opposition. He runs unopposed year after year after year. Why? Because he has built these relationships and built these coalitions with, say, a group of pharmacies, a group of durable medical equipment providers, a group of small rural healthcare clinics that he can come to the state capitol, advocate on their behalf. But now when he goes back to the district, those are his allies in spreading his own message to say, this is what our legislator has done for us. This is why we're supporting him in communities where people talk, where they go to the fire halls. Oh, yeah, I do want to know what these providers, these influential members of my community are saying. So it builds that two-way street. At the end of the day, it's something that those business owners are also glad to have that ally, and they can go build they are the ones that also spread the same message back down from the grass tops down to the grassroots.
Before we keep going, remember, folks, bring your questions and insights into the comments. Happy to bring them up, discuss them here on the show. We've talked a lot of great points here about how coalitions are built. Now, the topic here, our headline of this event, is creating impactful media messaging. So let's really zero in on the good, bad, and the ugly of media coverage surrounding coalitions. I said earlier, if you have one voice, that voice may not be trusted. Carrie, you put it differently. If you're sitting on the street corner, you're just one guy or one gal. If you're one person in a neighborhood saying change this policy, well, you own the biggest house on the block. Of course you want that. But if you have many voices that are across the spectrum, suddenly you're herding cats in the right direction, across living at one goal with one narrative, but you just have 8 different ways of saying it across 12 different platforms. Social media, 6 social media platforms, newsletter, town halls, signs, meetings, earned media, etc. So to me, from a media coverage perspective, coalitions are great at everything from everyone signs the same press release, and now that gets spread out, probably gets some coverage. Everyone puts it on their social. That's a very simple way to use a coalition to spread your narrative. But also, if you have a national coalition that can get some industry media coverage, you can get local and regional coverage, and you're getting some of that national coverage because it's a congressional issue and a state issue. That doesn't happen unless multiple members of the confederation or the coalition from different states, from different parts of an industry or multiple industries, in order to create that breadth of coverage. So, Jordan, let's look at you for a minute here. When you're trying to impact state level public policy, what was the minimum number of sort of voices that you felt were needed in order to create success, and how did those voices result in media coverage and related third party validation?
Yeah, great question, Dustin. And I'm smiling because we asked ourselves that same question every time we launched a campaign. How many people do we need to sign on to this to move the needle? And what I found is that number varies, but I can say that we were able to, for example, one bill in Georgia that we supported in my career, we were able to get across the finish line with really a handful of activists that were strategically positioned. And that's not to say that they didn't represent thousands of practitioners who experience the same thing, but these are the folks under the circumstances that we were able to identify and build trust with and mobilize. And it was actually remarkable how these handful of folks, and I'm literally talking about 3 people, were able to impact policy. And one of the ways that we were able to do that in the larger media and messaging space that you ask about is being mindful of the opposition. And one quick side, because I loved Carrie's comment about how coalitions contribute and add value based on the self-interest of their members. And that's so accurate. And it's also accurate that the opposition's self-interest adds value to the process too, right? That when those two ideas meet, that's where we get good public policy, because our ideas are refined. If our side is only arguing X without considering Y, we're not passing laws that benefit
You're
everyone.
just loud. You're just yelling a lot.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And on top of that, you're missing out on perspectives for policy that need to be considered. And that's gonna rear its head somehow by someone being affected by those oversights in the policy. So one important thing to get that messaging out there, even with as few people as 3, is keeping a pulse on your opposition or on the opposing voice. For example, I remember in Georgia, the opposition was organizing a rally at the Capitol, and knowing and understanding how members of the media cover that is important, because we wanted to be there so that there's a response to that voice that's getting out there. So we see a press release goes out. We want to be there, even if we don't organize in numbers. We're going to have 2 of our practitioners there to literally flag down the journalist who just got done interviewing the spokesperson at the rally, to say, hey, we'd love to share our side of the story too.
Yeah.
So that any coverage, there's their argument of the Y, and there's our argument of the X there as well. And that is incredibly valuable. If you were to put, money behind that, it could be tens of thousands of dollars, if not more, depending on your market, to get your message out in that way. When in this case, it's strategically showing up to the right place, at the right time, thinking how media members work and how you can partner with them to get your message out.
And always bring paper. Always have that piece of paper to hand them with your side of the story on it. Always bring the paper.
Telling y'all, she knows when she's talking. Take notes, everyone.
So I have a couple of random thoughts, if I can share, based on what people have said. One is about relationships. I think Robert and Jordan both touched on that. Remember that relationships come in tiers, and the top tier in a coalition is not always the most important one. I have friends who will say to me, will you get me a meeting with a member of Congress? And I'll say, yeah, I could, but I'm not going to. You want to speak with the staff, because they're the people that do the actual work, right? So always having those relationships with people who do the actual work, I think, is really, really helpful. Like, don't always aim too high. Sometimes it can hurt you in a coalition. Also about the messaging. You should never assume everybody in your coalition knows exactly what to say. They're excited about the issue, whether it's a business issue, a political issue, in your public affairs space, wherever it is. They might not always know. So make sure this is where leadership and communication strategy comes in. You help them with that messaging. You're not trying to tell them exactly what to say and being all bossy, but it's like, these are the 4 points that we're trying to get across. We really need to stick to these. I have found in my experience, when you give people a sheet of paper with the messages and the narratives on there, they're so grateful, because they care so much about the issue, but they don't want to mess it up. And also, before I came to Proven Media, I was running a national organization on a very specific policy issue. And we would often get a call as a national group, and we would also often get a call from a state person who said, oh my gosh, this horrible piece of legislation is being considered, or adversely, this great piece of legislation. Can you help us? We would start calling all the organizations that we knew would be ideologically aligned with us. And we created what we called finish line coalitions, and I cannot recommend them highly enough. We met on Zoom most of the time, twice a week, sometimes 3 times a week for 3 or 4 weeks before legislation was brought to the floor. We killed a bunch of stuff in committee. We helped pull out a lot of stuff in committee. And again, it wasn't me doing it. It was me leading the people in the state and pushing them down one cow path to get to where they wanted to go. So again, I'm not taking credit for it, but I'm just saying that's where the leadership comes in. You have all these disparate groups and voices, and they really want to help, but they have to have that leadership, and they have to have that communication strategy. And I don't mean communication strategy at some high level that nobody's going to understand, depending on where the issue is in the intensity of issue category. Sometimes it's very simple talking points, sometimes it's very complex data, but providing resources to your coalition is just the best thing you can possibly do for folks.
And can I jump in there real quick, Dustin? Just to build on what Carrie.
My job is to moderate. If you don't need me to moderate, I'll just in fact.
No, I mean, I just want to emphasize Carrie's point because it's a great one. But there's, I mean, what you were saying, Carrie, reminds me of a quote from a fellow New Mexican. She's actually historically on the other side of the political thought from myself, even though we share a homeland. But Dolores Huerta, who famously says, "Every moment is a opportunity to." And every person a potential activist, every minute a chance to change the world. So taking that seriously, excuse me, and equipping everyone in your coalition, even if it's 3 or 4 people.
Yeah.
Because you never know who they're talking to, and you want that. If your message is going to be shared, you want it to be accurate. You want it to be just that, your message, because you never know who's listening and who's going to have that. Again, coalitions are a social organization. They're a social entity, and when you don't know who's listening, but you assume that those decision makers are, and you want to take advantage of every opportunity of that.
Yeah, and sort of again, what we were talking about a minute ago about, when you go to a rally, bring your press statement or your whatever, because hand it to the media guys. I'm a huge proponent of paper. I know I just said this a minute ago, but I just want to reiterate. If you are going to see a legislator, if you're going to see an official, if you're going to the Chamber of Commerce, to the Rotary, to a trade association, to a union meeting, bring resources. Do not assume that anybody's staff or any official or any principal has the time, staff, or budget to find documentation, data, all that stuff. That's a huge role of a coalition, is to find those resources and provide them and bring them along with. It's really helpful. And again, it doesn't matter what the tier is, whether it's a local grassroots group or a huge national issue, providing data is so important. And we see this on our news all the time when some member of Congress is asked a question about, well, how much does it cost? Well, let me get back to you. That's never the answer you want to give anybody. So, providing resources is another key part of coalitions that you have to think about when you're running one.
A responsibility.
Intentionality. Yeah.
I would say, because that's the whole idea of the republic, right? Is that we have a responsibility to inform these decision makers too. Yeah, they can't be experts on everything.
Well, I want to give Robert a chance to talk for a minute. So
yep,
let's have Robert jump in.
I think too, there's a important non-paper side to all this with the coalition building, because in the current marketing world, there's a big struggle, whether it's advocacy groups, but especially businesses are facing. And that it's people don't consume the marketing content the way they did 20 years ago. A former CEO in the restaurant business a few months ago told me, says, no one's watching TV. And being a little bit facetious, people are watching TV, but they're fast forwarding through the commercials. You have to find, it's kind of the Wild West, but you have to go out and find influencers. Now, the nice thing is everybody has a potential to be an influencer. Everybody is a direct marketer. Anyone in your coalition has access to Facebook, social media, but that's creating a bit of a necessity where to be effective as a marketer, regardless of the industry, you have to think in terms of coalitions. You have to say, where am I going to build my message to reach my target audiences? And it could be it could be in selling a widget, but from a practical business standpoint, I think one of the best examples is things like events. Downtown, in my hometown, we have the Downtown Business Coalition. All the restaurants and the office space holders. They are. It's kind of like a chamber of commerce, but they are usually involved when there's a big, say, weekend basketball tournament or a music festival, and while the coalition itself or the entity that's organizing this may even be a nonprofit, they're supported by this Downtown Business Coalition. They're getting membership dues to be able to go out and market that these things are going on and host them. But when you go back down the other way, those coalition members, the businesses, the hotels, the restaurants, the bars, they all need this event to be marketed well, because that's where they're getting their revenues when people come in for this event or come in for the weekend as tourists or come in for a convention. Those same members are also your marketers and advertisers. They have the ability to reach their own following. When we say from the very top, this is happening, spread the word. You really want to be actively pushing that messaging back down the funnels or back up out the funnels, whichever really is your perspective, because that's critical. We can't just run an ad on TV nowadays and say there's a concert, everybody come. Why? Because our target audience isn't watching it, no matter how much our budget is to pay for expensive television advertising.
The fact is, when there's an ad on a TV show that I'm watching, my wife and I have Amazon Prime, I put it on pause and I go do the dishes, or I go. The kids are sleeping. I mean, I don't really watch commercials. To your point, Robert. So we have about 10 minutes left, folks. So anyone who's watching, please do ask your questions. I do want to dive into some of the dangers, and we've talked some media coverage, but I really want to dial into the dangerous side of media coverage. When you're herding cats, as you said, Carrie, you can't, you don't use the time or effort or need to do an FBI background search. But, the Obama coalition was built extremely well across, elevating, getting the base more excited, more Black voters, more young voters than the average, but also building that famous Obama coalition. Trump did the opposite, they built a different kind of coalition. He did get a significant number. I believe that in 2020, he got the greatest number of minority votes of any Republican candidate since Dwight D. Eisenhower, 60 years earlier, almost 70 years earlier. Those coalitions are built, to Robert's point, even when you think the other side is a monolith. But Trump got into a lot of trouble in 2016 because some members of his coalition are racist. Some of the people in his coalition are not of the kind of people that we necessarily, regardless of your political point of view, in this American culture that we have, we don't want them being part of public life. Obama had to defend against his former pastor, saying GD America. That became a huge problem. And he did the whole race speech surrounding that person who may have represented a significant portion of his coalition. So let's talk, a little bit about how you keep people out of the coalition without alienating existing members or others you want to become, and how you manage the media operation. So, Jordan, you send your 2 people, and you thought about sending the 3rd one, but you knew that person might not be the best fit for that event.
No, great Great question. And herding cats is the right analogy. What your question makes me think of, Dustin, is when I worked for the Koch network, we would quote Charles Koch, the founder, when he said, "Work with anyone to do good and no one to do harm." And that was really our mantra when we were forming these coalitions, whether they were virtual or in person. And uh, but it is incredibly important to do your own due diligence, because while you want that uh, wide net to capture those who believe in that one thing that you're coalescing the coalition around, you also can't afford detractors. And looking at that through the media lens, that how visible is this person? Back to Carrie's point about these levels of involvements of coalition members. If it's someone who is sending a letter to a county commissioner, we need to measure how much exactly due diligence or vetting we need to do versus someone we're helping write an op-ed to get placed to tell their story, and doing the due diligence and the vetting there to just again wear the media glasses on, like, will this detract in any way, or will the message here be our message in their piece?
Well, Kerry, let's talk a little bit too about how even if that person has the right message, are they the right messenger?
Right.
Is there stuff that's going to be dug up about them? Nick Shirley, the videographer, the documentarian who went viral in the last 2 weeks, said, "There's nothing in my background. I have no sex scandals and everything else. I don't know the guy. Maybe he's telling the truth, but he believes that he's a credible voice because he believes he doesn't have a personal scandal that would detract from his credibility in general." So just because someone has the right, they're willing to go with the narrative. Well, all it takes is a Google search, to your earlier point, Carrie, to find out that this person did this thing or that thing. And now, sure, you got the good media coverage on the front end, but they're about to get a slew of bad media coverage.
Yeah, we see that a lot. We saw this week with one of the appointees in New York City, who's a tweet from, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago popped up that nobody likes, including fellow Democrats, right? So you never know what might pop up. And again, so is it perfect? No. But you do need to ask these questions. And again, this is where leadership comes in. And just because someone has good standing and a good reputation doesn't always make them the best communicator either. So you have to evaluate, is this person an actual good communicator? Some people are brilliant written communicators, but we've all seen them on Fox News or CNN or MSNBC, and they're frozen, and they're brilliant, and they have something brilliant to say, but they're not comfortable in front of a camera. So not only do you have to vet your staff that or your members that you're sending out there to be public, to make sure there's nothing yucky in the background, or take advantage of the yucky thing in the background, which is another story. But you have to make sure that you're putting them in the right place. I love to write. I can't do math. Don't ever ask me to do math. It's the same thing with coalitions, right? Don't ever ask someone who gets, nervous in front of a crowd to do a radio show. It's just not going to work. So that's where that leadership comes in, where, you really have to have a serious person leading a coalition, whether it's someone within the coalition or it's a public affairs firm helping you to make sure that you're doing the right. And as far as taking advantage, there's nothing like a redemption story. So anybody who finds something bad in the background, I would always say it's a redemption story. Just go with that. Just go with that. But yeah, you do have to be very careful of those things. Absolutely. And now it's easy to find this stuff, right?
That's the other thing.
Yeah.
Or fake it. Or fake it.
Yeah, well, and that's a whole nother show
That's
about
a whole
artificial
different thing.
intelligence and
Correct.
is it real and all that kind of
Yes.
stuff. But yeah.
Correct. Now,
Well, audiences can kind of see through it in the long run, right? Wouldn't y'all agree that when the coalitions are forced, when I always look at, like, politicians who clearly haven't been in a duck blind in their life put on camouflage hat and say I'm with the hunters and farmers. And people see through it. So you have to have legitimacy. There has to be an actual glue that works. And I think that applies to from the business standpoint. Always drives me nuts to see fast food restaurants going out and saying, well, look at all of our healthy options. Like, I know you're trying to make a squeaky wheel happy, but everyone knows your junk food. And me as the consumer, I personally would just rather you make the best tasting junk food in the market.
Well, let's
You know
dial
what
into
I
that,
hear.
because what was the name of the documentary, or the claim that this person made that he ate a certain amount of McDonald's food on
Super
overnight?
size me.
Supersize me.
And
Yeah.
that, and this was before the internet or the social media is what it is today.
Mm-hmm.
And that did a real number, I think, on the public's perception of McDonald's. We all kind of knew, but it's the equivalent of having a chicken breast on your plate and watching the chickens, get killed live on the farm. So a lot of times businesses, there's a number of polls out there showing that government officials, CEOs, corporations, religious institutions are just not trusted. So if you're Amazon in 2020, you have I think it was one union organizer accuse the company of working them too hard, too long in unsafe conditions given COVID. And that person I don't remember his name, but I remember the image like it was yesterday, and it was 5.5 years ago. And he went viral. I think the NLRB got involved once President Biden took office. And over the next several years, I don't know if it was directly related, but Amazon got hit with a lot of restrictions and lawsuits related to labor organizing. And I have to think that one guy speaking out made the difference when no one trusts the institutions. So when it comes to a business coalition, how often should the maybe key members of the coalition that are speaking to the public not have the letter C near their name? Robert, from your point of view.
Well, I don't know if you remember the Blackfin scandal with SeaWorld.
Oh, yeah.
When the documentary and there were a whole bunch of issues, animal welfare issues involved. One of the genius things that SeaWorld did, in my opinion, at that time, was they didn't go out and say, "Oh, here are all of our animal welfare experts," and when SeaWorld's great. I mean, it I don't know enough about like how animals in captivity, how they're raised. I'm not a zoology expert, but what SeaWorld did was they just went out and said, here is what our parks enable us to do. And it didn't come from a CEO. It didn't come from a manager or a spokesperson. They went out and funded and just said, here are the facts. Our parks raise the money to study animals, to improve habitats around the world. And and they just put it out. And it made the issue go away because it didn't, in my opinion, it wasn't this forced. Here's the CEO of all these companies saying we love SeaWorld and SeaWorld does a great job. It was just one message. They funded it and they kept a very couple simple facts, which I think that was effective. Because again, I go back to my point. People see through audiences see through your artificial coalition or your something that's just kind of you pulled together just because you have the brand, you're a market leader and you can.
And they know when all your protest signs were printed at Staples and distributed nationwide. You kind of lose your grassroots card when that happens.
What was the political protest almost a decade ago? It had like fill in the name because they printed out all the signs.
Oh no.
But what was that one, Carrie? Do you remember?
I don't remember that, but that's great.
Yeah, there was a protester and they had a bunch of signs that they had printed off like before the election or the bill passage. It was like the bill did X, and they left the letter X in there because they didn't have that effectiveness.
I love it.
But again, you can't overthink it at the same time. So let's wrap up on this, which is again, coalitions. We have legislative season coming up. We have midterms right after that. At the end of the day, if you're a Democratic lawmaker in a red state, you might be introducing legislation that is not meant to pass. It's really meant as a messaging legislation because you want to win re-election, because at least you can say you're standing up for it, right? I don't envy Republicans in, say, blue or purple states, because they're going to have to defend balancing a budget, which is required by law in most, if not all, states. And yet, federal health care subsidies are ending or have ended. And if Congress doesn't pass a bill, there's probably going to be a lot of pressure on state governments to fill the gap. So I don't envy the fiscally conservative Republican in a blue or purple state trying to go in for re-election saying, I help balance the budget. Oh, sorry that your healthcare costs went up. So there's going to be real, legislative season has a real impact. So what is the key one-line message you would leave with consultants, public affairs agencies who are working with public policy with an eye toward the midterms? Again, mostly looking at state level lawmaking.
Start now. Staff is in the office.
I'm looking at a full sentence.
Yeah, start now. Seriously. And I don't just mean start now in a vague sort of sense. I mean, start making the phone calls, go in and create those relationships with that staff, bring the materials with you, the data that you have to, back up what your position is on this, give them all the resources they could possibly use plus more. Because I've seen people, I don't even know how many times, like the week of legislative session starts and they start making these phone calls.
Right.
Well, 5 million people are calling these same staffers. They're not calling the staffers this week. They'll be calling them, in May when it starts in Idaho or whatever it is. I mean, it really does. Coalition building is a year-long project, and it is least efficient if you start it in the middle of session. You have to lay the groundwork and create the relationships and create the messaging strategy now, even if you're not implementing it until, pick a date, September, August of this year. You have to start now.
Good stuff. And mine would be, remember that lawmakers are humans, and that there is the traditional path to get a lawmaker's ear through the front door of their inbox and their phone at their office. But these people are also members of communities. They have those side conversations at grocery stores with trusted people in their community, and identifying those, I guess you could call them grass tops people, that is important. They're politicians, especially and particularly because of the midterms, their ears are about, this big. They're listening for what's out there. I've seen it. And it makes me think of a campaign that we did in Texas for educational choice. And our target there was to cultivate a coalition of folks who would actually be affected by the policies, and not just your politicos who show up to county party meetings every week. And there's an important distinction between those two. Sometimes they overlap, but for the most part, those politicos are already sending emails daily, weekly to legislators, and they're a bit more, tribalistic, I would say. They're politically charged, whereas the folks who are at the grocery store speaking with the legislator, I would argue their message is a lot more powerful, because the legislator, from my experience, tends to value it as a more accurate pulse of what their community is thinking and believing.
And I would say that Dustin probably, these moments knows what I'm about to say. But I think this echoes a little bit what Carrie mentioned about starting now, and that's everything is sales.
Right.
If you're getting started now, you start the same way you would start your sales season, and it's blocking and tackling. It's not complicated, but it's the same principles. It's going out and building those relationships, and it's the same mentality, whether you're a business, whether you're in public policy, whether you're in politics. You build your partnerships the same way, and you have to really take the same mindset. The nice thing is the mechanics end up being the same.
Everything is sales. So in this case, it would be this. It's getting voters, really.
Right.
Because
Building your coalition.
Building your coalition, because when you introduce the bill or you vote on the bill, you're preparing that messaging with that end goal in mind of getting the re-election. So cool. Folks, this was fun. It's nice to have the whole team in front of the public, and just behind the closed Zoom doors that we usually live from. So
we're not just a bunch of email addresses on a bot farm.
Real people.
That's right. All right, folks. Well, thank you very much. Have a good rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody.
See y'all. Thanks, everyone.